When I was asked to do this, I was kind of surprised. Nobody really wants me to do anything, but Patsy said, you need to do it. You could make a friend. And I think y'all are helping me because a nice young man put this mic on, and he said, we have it off, but he said, and here is the tape recorder that's going to be recording the talk, and it's on right now. I said, right now? He said, yeah, we'll edit it later. So I said some really wonderful things about every one of you tonight. I know most of you don't know who I am, but I'm actually, you might not know there's ranking among preachers, and you spend your whole life trying to get up into the next category. And I'm proud to say that I'm at the very top of the group of preachers that preach for churches that have gravel parking lots. The great theologian Clint Eastwood said, a man should know his limitations. But I started off at churches that didn't have indoor plumbing. So, I mean, it's a moving up. And every now and then I get to preach at a paved parking lot church, and just like tonight. And it's just such a lovely thing. You just think maybe someday. Dare to dream, I know most of you don't know me, but where I come from, out in West Texas, he mentioned my tie, be true to your school. That's what I say. Just do what you can for who you are. And I realized when I was reading that I start to say obituary, but that little announcement, that I need to raise it up. There's a couple more countries in a few more years, 42 years at the same church preaching, much to the surprise of some and the dismay of others. But out in West Texas, people know me. They know me. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is this true story. Jerry, we had a retreat. We have them from time to time, especially every time we get some new elders. Let's have a retreat, And they wanted to have all the elders and all the deacons and the preachers from Southgate to go to a camp someplace and spend a day, 2 days, one night, praying and studying and planning, And they wanted me to fix supper Friday night. Since I didn't have a real job like everybody else did, and I didn't want to cook supper, so I ordered 35 chicken dinners from Kentucky Fried Chicken in Brady, Texas. The camp was at Brady, about an hour from San Angelo, and I ordered all this stuff a month ahead of time. And I got to worrying about it, so a week before the retreat, I called them and reminded them. And they said they knew all about it. And the day of the retreat, I called them and said, this is the day. And they said, okay. I said, we're leaving in just a few minutes. And they said, well, it's fine. Well, when I go out to get in the car to drive to Brady, 2 of the deacons are there, and they're going to ride with me. And they get in the car, and we yuck it up all the way to Brady, and we pull into the restaurant, and I walk in there. And I knew I was in trouble as soon as I walked in, because the girl at the counter, she just wasn't in, she was from somewhere else. I mean, physically she was here, but she was not of this earth, and I walked up to her and I said, I'm the guy that ordered all that chicken. And she looked at me like I was from Mars. And I knew. I said, it's not ready, is it? She doesn't even shake her head. She just stares at me. And I said, young lady, in a few minutes, there's going to be 35 people come into this town, and we're going out to that camp, and they're expecting a chicken dinner. You better start cooking. And she still just stares at me, and I think, where do they come from? And how do you hire somebody like that? Do you put an ad in the paper saying incompetent help wanted? And why is it I always get them? And I said, and I want mashed potatoes with that, 35 chicken dinners that you're not ready with. And she said, we don't have mashed potatoes. And I said, no mashed potatoes? What do you have? She said, we have French fries. I said, we're going to eat in about 2 hours. Do you know what those French fries are going to taste like by then? And her lip quivers a little, but she doesn't answer. And I said, okay, give me mashed potatoes. And we need a bunch extra biscuits. We don't have biscuits. I said, what do you have? I'm getting a little loud now. I needed to hear that Sermon on the Mount, but She said, we have bread. I said, well, then give me some bread. And about then, the manager comes out. He was about 17, about that tall, had a greasy apron on, pimples, and obviously he's in love with the zombie girl because he gets between me and her and says, can I help you? And I said, I hope so. Said, can you tell me what a man has to do to get chicken in this town? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I ordered this 35 dinners a month ago. I called you a week ago. I called you again today, and it's still not ready. What do I have to do? And he said, sir, did you call Kentucky Fried Chicken in Brady, Texas? I said, yes, I did. And he said, well, this is the Dairy Queen. And I look, and my deacons are over there at the door going, they think this is the grandest thing that ever happened. All the time she and I were having this conversation, I'm looking at the menu and I'm thinking, what kind of a place is this? They have corn dogs, but they don't have mashed potatoes. Well, we go out, get in the car, drive 100 feet to the Kentucky Fried Chicken. They have it all sacked up, ready to go. I put it in the car, and the guys are just dying. They're just dying. And I said, not a word. And they said, right. That weekend, I don't know if surely you've been to something like this. They all follow the same script. We need to spend more time with the Lord's Supper. We need to have more singing. We need to maybe have a table talk. But we need to be out in 58 minutes. Which translated to preachers is, cut it short, cut it short. So all weekend I'm fighting for my turf. And every time I'd make a good point, someone would say, could you get me some chicken? The Sunday morning, every word of this is true. The Sunday morning I get up to preach, the next Sunday, there's Dairy Queen coupons all over the pulpit. A year later, I'm driving through Brady, and I stop at that Dairy Queen, and I get me a big Diet Coke, and I'm walking out of the place, and there's a rancher drinking coffee, and he looks at me and said, did you come back for some more chicken? Maybe nobody knows me in Oklahoma City, but all over West Texas, I'm the chicken guy. I hope you know what an amazing thing that you're doing here is. We're not at a time of uniting. We're not at a time of people working together. We're not at a time of even liking each other or laughing with each other. We're at a time that's kind of you know what it is. And this is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. And it's a good thing. And I'm really tickled to be here and to see you guys and to know that the body of Christ is doing fine. It's doing fine. I got 3 things to tell you tonight. These are some some lessons I've learned in 50 years of preaching. And I learned most of the things I learned in conversations and disasters, stuff like that. First one, when my little girl Jennifer was a little girl, she called us out to the yard one day and said, I've got a trick I want to show you. And we had a swing that was a rope with a kind of a, not two ropes, but one rope with a little deal on it, and they would straddle that rope and they would swing around and everything, and she had a trick all worked out. And her plan was to run at that swing and grab that board and swing up real high and do a kind of a flip and sit on that swing and come back down. She was kind of chubby. That might surprise you to think that I'd have a chubby kid, but she did. And she runs at that swing, and she grabs that swing, and she gets almost all the way out as far as you could go, and she lost her grip and flew through the air and hit on the ground, and we think she killed herself. We run over there, and she's mad. And she said, "That happens every time." And I said, "Well, baby, why do you do it?" She said, "It's the only trick I know." So my first thought for you would be, if the only trick you know doesn't work, maybe you ought to get another trick. Just a thought. We bought a car one time, a new car. That's pretty rare for our family. It wasn't about, in the 70s. Jennifer was a little girl. It was a Ford Crown Victoria. Remember those? It's the nicest car I ever had. Had velvet seats. Had everything you could put on it. The first time I went to get it washed, Jennifer wanted to go with me. I didn't want her to go. If you take a little kid with you, it takes a lot more quarters, because they kind of take up that time and that clock is ticking. But I let her go. And then when we got there, she wanted to know if she could hold the wand. And I said yes. And when I put that last quarter in there, that wand did like this, and she hit the front left fender of my new car and knocked a chunk of paint off as big as my thumbnail, and I know because I measured it. And so my light gray, almost white car has a black spot on it that there's nothing you can do about it. Now, I didn't hit her. I didn't even yell at her. I said, "Get in the car." And she cried, and I cried. And for weeks after that, every time I looked at the car, I'd cry again. My new car was ruined. I turned around 3 times. This is a figurative statement there. And the car won't run anymore. I refused to put the third motor in it. It was a piece of junk. It was wore out. And I think I got $200 for it. I might have paid the guy that drug it off. I turned around a couple more times, and that little girl grew up. Fortunately, I have a good wife, and we had some good days too, and she doesn't seem to be too damaged by me. I'm going to tell you for sure, if I could live my life over again, that would be one day I would do different. I would say, don't worry about it. It's just a car. Someday they'll make tuna fish cans out of it. It's nothing. And I determined then I'm not going to cry over anything that can't cry over me. Write that down. It's a good rule. This stuff is this stuff. Our family, our friends, the church. If they can't cry over you, don't cry over it. It's not that big a deal. The third thing that I learned was when I was a boy. We lived in Abilene, and we lived down we lived right across. If you ever been to Hillcrest there's a Ambler Road is right there, and across the road there on 23rd Street is where I lived. The college was just up the block a little bit. We called it the Holy Hump where we lived, up on the hill, and looked down on those hardened sinners over there at the Baptist school. But when I was a boy, we had many adventures. There was a park not far from us, and there was a lot of alleys you could go scout around in and do things, look for treasures and stuff. But one of our favorite places was a few blocks away, and down the hill was a bait stand. Now, I've already told you more about how we lived than you should know, but you know what a bait stand is. It's a kind of a store, like a convenience store, except they really specialize in only a few things. This one was an old-time bait stand. They had big barrels of kerosene and gasoline and white gasoline. That's if you don't want to spend what it costs to buy Coleman fuel, you could buy white gasoline. And they had cane poles hanging from the ceiling, and they had some food in there, and they had one of those old Coke boxes that had cold water in it. Remember those, If you had money, you could get something. If you didn't, you could put your hand in there and see how long you could hold it till you had to quit. Or if the guy that owned the place caught you, he would say, "Have you got any money?" And you said, "No." He said, "Get out of here," that kind of deal. But we would go even when we didn't have money because it was a manly place. There was hardly ever a woman in the bait stand, It was guys that liked to fish and camp and hunt. And they'd be in there buying their beanie weenies or whatever they were going to buy. And if you were quiet and you tried to be invisible and kind of got off the side, you would hear things you wouldn't hear at church. You would hear stories that fired your imagination, and you would hear words that you're not allowed to say. So we went there a bunch. 3 preachers' boys. One day we went there, and one of our things we always did is we'd go look at the bait. There was minnows and crawdads and stuff like that. But that day they had a shipment. We'd never seen anything like it. They were like salamanders. They called them mud puppies. Other places they call them water dogs. But they looked like dinosaurs to us. And they were cheap. I don't remember what they cost, but we were able to buy about 6 of them. Maybe more, I don't know. And we bought them. They were alive. We took them home. We got out there in the backyard and put the little trucks and the army men together, and we attacked them with the mud dogs. And if you're thinking about buying your kids a pet, they're not a very good pet. Mainly because they're not very durable. You crash him into a truck a couple of times and he's done, After we had finally killed all of our mud puppies, we kind of got, we had 50 cents tied up in that, and we were kind of melancholy about it, and we decided we would have a funeral. Well, we knew all about that kind of stuff, and so we got to talking about it, and we decided that what we would do is we would bury this. Every word of this is true. You can't make this stuff up. But we decided that we would bury them in their natural habitat. Since they died in the sandbox, they could at least be buried in water. So we got a big pickle jar. Man, I'm telling you more than what I should tell you. But there it is. There's this, and we filled it with water, and we put them in there. And there they are, floating in the water. And then we go out in the backyard, and we dig a hole, and we bury them. We said the right words, not the ones we learned at the bait stand, but the ones we learned at church. And we buried them. This would have been like May. One hot afternoon in August, we got to wondering how our mud puppies were doing. We were bored, and we dug them up. And some kind of transformation had taken place. There weren't any mud puppies in there, just murky water and little chunks of stuff, And we looked and looked, and we were just kids. But I was the oldest and the wisest, and I said, I'll see what this is. And so I start trying to open that jar. And when I broke the seal on the jar, now I'm going to say this, I know you just ate, so I'm going to say this as delicately as I can, but the worst smell you could even imagine just attacked me. And I dropped the jar, and 1 gallon of pure stink just poured out on the ground there. Now, in those days, in that neighborhood, nobody had central air conditioning or anything like that. A lot of people just had windows that were open. Some of them had evaporative coolers stuck in those windows, swamp coolers, And that smell, did y'all see the 10 Commandments? Do you remember how that green vapor that went through Egypt and just killed people on contact? Well, that smell started going out from our backyard, and you could tell when people discovered it, Neighbors came out of their houses, and they all started talking. We brought the whole neighborhood together, and they were washing trash cans and digging around in the tall grass in the alley looking for the dead cat, and we decided we'd done enough, and so we hid out. But when Dad came home that night, he pulled in the driveway, he got out of the car, he breathed, and he said, boys, he always called us in on important things like that. And we're standing there, and he says, what is that smell? Like he knew we would know. We took him around the backyard where your eyes burned when you were back there. He said, could be that. And he bent over and smelled of it, and he got shovels, and he gave us shovels, and he made us dig a big hole over here away from it. And then we had to dig all of that stinking dirt and put it in the hole and cover it up. And finally, after a lot of digging and a lot of covering, the neighborhood could go to bed. Now, why did I tell you that story? Listen carefully. Everyone here has been sinned against. Some of you have been sinned against grievously. It might have been a long time ago, but you still know where it's buried. You still know what's there. And every now and then, you're tempted to dig it up. And let me beg you not to do that. You cannot dig it up. I know, I was there. You cannot do that without getting it all over you. If you can, leave it alone. If you can't, give it to God, but don't dig it up. The mud puppies didn't care. They were dead. The guy at the bait stand didn't care. Nobody cared. It was ancient history to them. It was nothing. But it was a really bad evening for us. Preaching is quite a deal, isn't it? I talked to a preacher one time. He said he was going to quit. I said, why are you quitting? He said, well, the elders said some really tacky things to me, and I'm not going back till they take them back. I said, what'd they say? He said, well, for one thing, they said you're fired. But I thought he showed a lot of wisdom there, don't you? There was a young preacher one time that he was in one of those terrible meetings, and they fired him. He begged, didn't matter. He told them about his family. Didn't matter. Told him it wasn't his fault. Didn't matter. As he's leaving the room, one of the elders, who hadn't been an elder very long, still had some compassion about him. Wasn't bitter. He got the young man off, and he said, "Son, you know, it really gets you when they call you son. Nobody calls me son anymore. They call me old man now. But son, we understand there's a job at the zoo." Next day he goes down there, and he said, "I understand you got work here." The zookeeper looks around, and he said, "Can you keep a secret?" He said, "Of course I can. I'm a minister of the gospel. I've seen people at their worst. I've heard the worst stories you could imagine. I don't tell anybody anything." He said, "Good." He takes him in his office. He closes the door, shuts the window. He said, "We got a big problem here at the zoo. Our gorilla has died. They're endangered. You can't even get another gorilla. And if you could, we couldn't afford it. The Lions Club built us this big gorilla cage, and we got no gorilla. We did have his skin tan, though. And we need a fellow about your size to wear that skin and be the gorilla." He said, "I won't do it. Not at all. Never. No, I am a trained professional. You know, I've been to school. You know, I'm not going to be a gorilla in the zoo." And he said, "It pays $15 an hour." He said, "Oh, yeah, I'll do it." Well, it's the worst job he ever had in his life. It was horrible. For one thing, he had to get up real early every morning because he had to be down there before anybody came to the zoo. He had to be the first one there and get in costume and get in that cage, and he had to stay there until the last person left. And he, up until that moment, he didn't know that the sun came up real gradually. Let me mark that one off. That didn't go. That didn't go at all, did it? I forgot mostly preachers here. That's what I forgot. One day he's sitting in the cage, and he's having a meltdown. He said, "My life is ruined. It's ruined. This isn't anything like what I planned. My life is just ruined. If I eat another banana, I'm going to scream. I can't do it. I can't do it." And he's sitting there and he's saying, "Where did I go wrong? What can I do?" You know, he's going through all of the options, which aren't very many, because gorilla's pretty much at the bottom of the job list, you know. And a family walks by the cage, and a little girl looks at him and waves at him. And he, without thinking where he was and how he was decked out and everything, he waves back at her. And she said, "Daddy, that gorilla waved at me." Well, one thing led to another, and it's not long, and they have the world's smartest gorilla. He could march. He could dance. He could do impersonations. He was wonderful at pantomiming. People started coming from everywhere to see him. Hundreds and hundreds of people every day just to see this gorilla. The largest congregation he ever had. And they loved him. And the zookeeper was just ecstatic. He said, "A few more months like this and we can afford to put in a snake house. This is great." Gave him a raise. And every day he worked on his routine. And more people came. One day, there was 300 people outside of the cage, standing on tiptoes. And he went through his act. And they said, "More." And then as one, 300 people started chanting, "More, more, more." Never in all the years he preached did anyone ever say more. And he wanted to give them more. So he did his act again. And they said, "More." And he starts looking around, and he has this rope with a tire hanging on it. And he says, "I'll swing on that rope. That's what I'll do. They'll like that." And he starts swinging on the rope. And they start saying, higher, higher. And he's getting higher and higher. And then he has a wonderful idea. He'd never put sound in his act before, but then he started saying, whoo, whoo, whoo. And they loved it. They started applauding and cheering. And he's getting higher and higher and higher. And after a while, he's kicking off the sides of the cage. And he's just swinging around. And the people are cheering. And the rope broke. And he flies through the air and lands in the lion's cage. Well, he forgot all about being a gorilla. He ran over there to the gate, and he couldn't get out, and he starts shaking the bars, and he said, get me out of here. One of the lions walked up to him and said, would you shut up? Do you think you're the only preacher out of work in these parts? I hope Easter's wonderful for you. I hope the St. Patrick's Day is glorious. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving and Christmas. Hope next New Year's. I say that because I'm never invited back anywhere. So.